Kwai Ndilwizi Sally Gould, Ndai Monadnock, Mukiak, Massasecum, Nia Abaznadak Had. So I just said to you in Abenaki, hi, my name is Sherry Gould. It's funny when Remy said Sherry Young, my very dear friend is Sherry Young, who's now in Ireland, but I'm Sherry Gould. And I was born in Peterborough, so at Monadnock I use the place name, which most of our place names, or many of them, are Abenaki. So I was born at Monadnock, and I live at Massasecum, the lake in Bradford. I'm actually a little tip of Warner, halfway between Bradford and Henniker. And I'm a professional basket maker. I'm not fluent in my language. I know as much as I know. We do have all the words for, I am a fiber artist, which is what I do the most now. My husband and I have a farm. We have 220 acres and we raise sheep and Angora bunnies. I worked in child welfare. I did a lot of the work that is talked about in this film for many years. And now I play with cute, fluffy bunnies. When I left, I did residential for a long time. I worked for Lutheran Social Services, and when I left that, my boss bought me a burnout bush, burning bush, and there was another connotation. I forget now, but at any rate, it's tough work, and I really love the fiber arts, but I haven't really committed to memory. I am a fiber artist. Our language is very much, orally it's the same as the Penobscot language. So I understood most of what the Penobscot speaker said. But one of the things I wanted to mention, I don't know if people caught the looks on people's faces, especially at that section when they were talking about that the documents that were being produced by these questionnaires would be for research purposes, and people had to choose whether they wanted their name associated, and that look of horror on the woman's face. There's a long history of helpers coming in and using Native people, probably with a sincere intention of being helpful, but not really being all that helpful. And so, just as a not very damaging example, but frustrating example for me today, though the Penobscot and the Abenaki language is identical orally, because they were recorded by two different anthropologists, written, they look nothing alike. And in the Penobscot language, we saw the upside down E. It represents, I'm not an expert in Penobscot written language, but I believe that's the nasal sound. So the word skunk we all use is an Abenaki word, and that U sound is the nasal sound in our language, and that's what the upside down E is, I believe, in the Penobscot language. In the Abenaki language, it's either an 8, which is really convenient to try to read along and see an 8 in the middle of words frequently, and be able to get past that and know that's the U sound in skunk. Yeah, that's easy. Or it's an A with, I never know what to call it, the tent over it. Yes, thank you. That's what it is. In the Abenaki language. So you can see that we cannot read each other's languages as easily as we can speak them and understand each other. So, and then there's just all kinds of horrible stories of eugenics and all kinds of things that have gone on where helpers haven't been very helpful. In terms of the child welfare part, there's a couple of short things I'll tell you, and then I'll open it up to questions. The work I did in child welfare regarding the Indian Child Welfare Act probably started, I worked in residential care, and then I went to work for the state, and I don't know if you caught at the end the statistics that were taken regarding the disproportionate placement of Native Americans in foster care came from the AFCARs and NCANs. They didn't say AFCARs and NCANs, but it was the foster care reporting systems. And that was my job for the state of New Hampshire. I was in charge of the database of the data quality that went in to make our reports to the feds on children in placement. What we knew in New Hampshire is that we had a disproportionate amount of minority children in the system, but what I knew was in terms of Native American children, we just weren't even recording ethnicity properly. For one thing, Abenaki to this day is still not even a tribe in the pick list for DCYF workers. Because our tribe is not federally recognized in the states, they aren't required by federal law. We don't fit under the Indian Child Welfare Act. And even the children from the Maine tribes or other tribes that may be living here in New Hampshire, it was never clear to me that they were being accurately recorded. I think that's improved a little over time, but when they talked about in the film that Maine had been cited for being out of compliance with ICWA, so the feds go around and check do compliance checks from state to state, and when they get to New Hampshire and Vermont, there's no federally recognized tribe, and so it pretty much gets glossed over. So you're not going to get the push in our state that you see in other states on the Indian Child Welfare Act. The other frustrating thing in my work with DCYF in consultation and being a help to them in the early days when they were at least trying, and I'm not saying they're not trying now, but in the early days of our work together, they would contact me and I would try to get a hold of the ICWA representative for the tribes, but each tribe has their own sovereignty and has their right to determine who are tribal members and what their policies and procedures will be. And for many of the families who were caught up in the child welfare system, Nashua has always had a very large population of Native Americans who work in Boston or in different trades down here, and it wasn't a top priority for the tribes to see those children come back. I mean, they pretty much felt that that was problems that the tribe was taking on, that those families had already been separated from their communities, and white people had basically, in their opinion, created the problems, so why are you calling us now to drag them back here? And they weren't going to be given the resources or whatever to deal with it. I could understand it. But anyway, so workers' experience wasn't that, usually it was just they wouldn't even get a call back. And if they did, it was hard to work. So for New Hampshire, it's a little bit different than it is for people in the state of Maine. After I left DCYF, I went to work for the Child Welfare League of America, the CWLA, and they were also referenced in some of this. And the Child Welfare League of America was very instrumental in a lot of the removals and adoptions of Native children into white homes. And there came a point in time where they issued an apology, a public apology. I don't know the year for sure. I want to say it was probably in the 80s sometime, maybe the early 90s. And I went to work for them afterwards. I worked for the section that went from state to state to give advice and help to the states on their NCANs and AFCARs, their child welfare data, and their child welfare information systems. And we did some technical assistance in the state of Maine. And so my boss was a lady I dearly loved. I won't name her. She was really a very nice lady, but it was very hard for me to sit with her. She was the former director of child welfare in the state of Oklahoma. It is a very large, of course, Native American population. And so as we sat with the director in Maine, she was explaining to her how Maine, the state, could get around having to work with the tribes, and that she had a lot of experience and she would be more than happy to share that with basically how to undermine ICWA and other Native American federal laws. So the federal laws governing Native Americans in our country are complex. There's 5 or 6 different areas. There's arts and crafts, there's Indian child welfare, there's, I can't even think now of the other laws. I've been preparing to do child welfare today, but anyway, there's 5 or 6 different areas, and they all conflict. Definitions from one to the other conflict, different agencies. I think that's, oh, one of the things Remy and I talked about, so in New Hampshire, historically, because we didn't have a federally recognized tribe, we had families who would come here. So there's a lot of history that goes beyond the scope of this talk about our population. So we had, just briefly I'll cover it, it goes beyond the scope, but to help understand, by and large, the local natives, certainly here in Concord, were Pennacook, and the Pennacook Indians were said to have been cleared out of New Hampshire by 1725. If you look in the boilerplate, I call it at the beginning of all the history books. But at any rate, the truth is that many Penobscot people did go to Maine. They chose to leave New Hampshire and go to Maine because of unfair dealings with Waldron over in Dover. But they were given by the Canadian government a French village called Odanak, which in Abenaki is at our village, Odanak, and it still exists today. Also, a lot of Penobscot people went there. At Odanak, they were clearly having, their children were being removed and put in Indian schools. Around 1900, a family called Louis and Catherine Watso, who were basket makers, Catherine was a basket maker, and they left Odanak and came down. They lived on Lake Sunapee initially, and specifically they came because their oldest daughter was taken by the Canadian government and sent to the Carlisle Indian School that we heard talked about on the film. And after the first year, she was just heartbroken, and the father said, never, ever, we're not staying here. Our basket making skills have brought Abenaki people back and forth over the border to sell their baskets forever. And so the Watsos have come to New Hampshire to Intervale, specifically selling their baskets every year anyway, and they came down and bought a place. They were very successful there at Sunapee. But the specific reason was so that their children would not be taken and put in Indian boarding schools. So New Hampshire really historically has been more of a refuge from the Indian school piece than, which isn't to say we haven't had our traumas, we couldn't benefit from some truth and reconciliation, but it's a lot more difficult here. We have a legislature who primarily, many of them believe that we were a pass-through state, that we didn't even have an Indigenous population. It's very difficult. It's not easy. I will never gladly engage in trying to get legislation passed again. I did that with the Commission on Native Affairs, and we never want to do it again. At any rate, that's, I think, about what I can share. But if any questions, I'd be happy to answer. And we do have another microphone if people want to pass that on.
I have not so much a question, but a statement. I work with Esther up in Maine. My kids are Penobscot Nation, they don't have. Is that I think the federally recognized tribes are doing a lot better with their child welfare, but they also have to understand that their budgets come from Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Health Services. And you need to produce paperwork to get those budgets passed and to keep those budgets in place. And half the time, they're not sufficient to cover half of what you need to do. So it's kind of like a double standard where trying really, really hard to do the work on a shoestring budget and do the best you can without the outside states still coming in and doing what they do. So it's uber hard to maintain good programs, because if you can't, for somehow, you didn't produce this percentage of whatever Bureau of Indian Affairs wanted, there goes your money right out the window. And then you're back at square one.
Thank you so much. And I hope my comments didn't sound like I was disparaging the tribes.
You're good.
Yeah, clearly that's the issue. And I mean, I attended Indian Child Welfare from the National Indian Child Welfare Association. I was a member and attending conferences around the country. And I remember, to my horror, sitting in a conference in in New Mexico, that in Albuquerque that there was child welfare, health and human service people, or a person, a representative, and a Bureau of Indian Affairs representative. I was very familiar with the child welfare side. I was not familiar as an Abenaki. I didn't have experience with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but to my horror, it became crystal clear that they were having a power struggle over who was going to enforce the Indian Child Welfare Act. So Bureau of Indian Affairs had been taken total offense that child welfare was starting to do some things in the Indian Child Welfare Act, and and I was like, wait a minute, are we talking about a turf war over, hello, could somebody enforce it? Like, nobody's enforcing it. And so it's extremely complicated, it's extremely frustrating, and how are Native people supposed to handle all that power fighting over the perps? Yeah, it just, yeah.
I work for DCYF,
Okay.
and I am the foster care resource worker.
Okay.
So I am the one who licensed people. I also worked as a family service worker, and I will let you know that here in New Hampshire, we take ICWA very seriously. And it is basically word of mouth of the parents. So we can be anywhere in a court process, and they can say, oh, I'm Indian. And we're like, oh, okay. It halts everything, and it's then our job to go research that. I don't know what that does for Dawnland, but I wanted you guys to know that it is something, at least here in Concord, because that's where I work.
The Concord District Office?
Yeah, that we do take very seriously, and we don't gloss over.
Yeah, I think DCYF has taken it seriously from day one, and I would get calls to do research at one point. At this point, were you trained by a Native person in Indian child welfare?
No, by attorneys.
Uh-huh. And have you been aware of any judges in New Hampshire getting training in the Indian Child Welfare Act?
I couldn't tell you, I could not affirm that, but I could tell you that the moment anybody says anything, a judge will stop where we're at as far as permanency and not move until we've done what we've needed to do. And we won't do anything, we won't move forward by word of mouth, we will pass it through an attorney.
And right, to look for, because it's very complicated for you in terms of different tribes have different.
You have to register, you have to be a registered tribe member in order to qualify.
Right. And in fairness to DCYF, I worked, at the end it was Maggie Bishop I was working with, and Nancy in the beginning, and at any rate, all along the way, Joan, DCYF's position was always that I think the crux of the biggest difference between Indian child welfare and how foster children are treated is that proactive efforts. I mean, it's much more complicated than that, but in terms of the practice, what the families experience, it's those proactive efforts.
Right.
And so